All right, the next technique, a persona, my favorite. A persona is a character or an archetype that you adopt. It's a way to have a specific tone of you. So, for example, let's take an example of something that I do in my work, and then we'll go back to our consulting company example. What I'll do is I'll take a concept, for example, and maybe I'm struggling to communicate that to my students. I'll say, act as a university student. Now, and then I would ask AI to act in that way as I'm crafting a response back. Let me give you a consulting company example. Let's say that you as a consulting company have a target market. You're targeting SMEs with less than $10 million in revenue with some XYZ type of product you're trying to sell. You could say, act as a target customer. What are my points of pain? You can have AI operate in a way that can allow you to not only understand your perspective, but the other perspective as well. I had an example of a company where this particular manager had a bunch of employees that were kind of acting up and having a tough time. She said, act as a manager who's having her direct reports having XYZ problems. How should I act? The persona actually asks AI to act like you. Now, as you know, if you interact with AI enough, it gets to know you. And so it's gotten to the point now where I interact with it so many times that I can say, act as me to write an email. Act as me to write a bio. So you can have AI act as you or take on a persona. So what are some things you can include in your persona? Maybe your hobbies, your interests, your background, your academic background. How do you want to communicate? Are you very formal or very informal? What are your goals? What are your values? What are your preferences from language or culture? Anything very specific. You can build a persona, and in building that persona, you can begin to formulate very specific responses to what you're achieving. Now, I'm going to give you a couple of advanced techniques as well that the systems have largely implemented as well, but just so you can be aware of some things you could do. One is a chain of thought. One of the problems with AI sometimes is it comes up with an answer, but you don't know how or why it came up with an answer. Well, you know what you can do? Ask it. That's chain of thought. What you can do is say, all right, break down this problem for me and help me to understand your thinking. So you can prompt AI to help you to understand how it's thinking. What that does for you is it begins for you to help to understand how you could reframe the problem that you're asking. Another one, maybe you're at a point where you want AI to help guide you, but there's decisions you need to make along the way. So let's take our consulting company, for example. Let's say that you're creating a marketing plan for a technology consulting company, and you think that you have a series of different target customers that you want to employ. So you could say, for example, help me create a social media marketing campaign targeting XYZ company. Help me to create it, but ask me questions for input along the way. So AI could come back and say, what platforms do you have? LinkedIn, Instagram, whatever. And you can ask AI to interview along the way. So all you have to do for this is say, as you're answering this question, ask me questions that will help you answer your questions. Now you see AI doing that. If you use ChatGPT in particular, sometimes they'll come back and say, here's 3 or 4 questions to answer. That's one example of that, but you can actually ask it to do that for you as well. Now, what if AI doesn't have the data you want it to have? That's called RAG. RAG is Retrieval-Augmented Generation. This says, I'm going to tell you where to look for information. So let's pretend you're the consulting company. What you could do is you could say, first, begin by looking at all the best practices that exist for consulting companies in XYZ information. You tell it what other information you want included in order for you to get a better answer. That is known as RAG. And what you can do is you can tell it where to look. The next one is react. React is where you ask AI to maybe slow down. It asks that model to reflect on what you're asking and then act by generating a response. So for example, I had AI come up with an answer which I clearly could see that it was very quick, great, but it wasn't accurate. So my response back to AI was, slow down, take your time, do research, and come back to me with a better answer. It did. It stopped, it did some external research, and the answer was better. So if you find that the answer is too quick, you can tell it to slow down, to think. Oftentimes, what I'll even do is I'll upload a document and say, tell me what you see in this document. So a lot of times before I give a lecture such as this, I'll upload my lecture to ChatGPT and said, think about this lecture and tell me what I'm missing. It can allow it to slow down and really think about what its answer as well. Lastly, what if you just don't trust it? What if you think, you know what, I don't know where it's getting information? You know what you can do? Ask. A technique called chain of verification or COVE. What you can do is you could say, help me to verify what you're telling me. So what it will do is it'll generate a response, and then you can verify if what it said is accurate or not. I'm going to take my New Kids on the Block example further for you. So the way this all started was my wife said, I wish I could read a biography about each member. Well, I wasn't sure if AI knew who all the members of New Kids on the Block were. So I said, ChatGPT, I want you to come up with a list of all of the autobiographies and biographies from the band New Kids on the Block. First, list all the members and verify that you have accurately found them. Then search for the autobiographies. So what happened is it came back and it said, here's a list of who I think is in New Kids on the Block. Am I right? And I said, yes. Why did I do that? Because I didn't want hallucinations. A hallucination is when AI doesn't know because it doesn't have the answer, doesn't have the data implicit in the training. So if you're not sure, ask it to make sure it can confirm beforehand. Now, one of the questions I get a lot is, how do I assess my prompts? How do I find if they're good or not? There's two frameworks that get you to thinking about your assessing your prompts. One's RACA and the other one's RAGAS. Now, these are not objective, meaning you can't score this. I can't go in and give you a measure of 0 to 100. Now, we're going to circulate these slides for sure, so you can look at this in greater detail. But one way to think about it is to think about each of your slides through this particular lens. Now, one thing that you could do, for example, is ChatGPT and Gemini are aware of these assessment tools. You can ask ChatGPT, assess the prompt I gave to you based upon the RACA framework. What that'll do is it enables you to learn how to better prompt, because it's that interaction that's going to give you clarity. But the other area where this gives you some assistance is, as you think about your prompts, think about what you're asking. Make sure that it's relevant. Make sure it's accurate. For example, don't ask, tell me about the last time that Einstein went to the moon. There's not going to be accurate. I will tell you it'll generate a response, but it won't be right. So think about this as you assess your prompts. What if your prompts are more complicated? One of the coolest things that you can create are custom GPTs. Custom GPTs are where you create a GPT specific to a specific use case. They allow you to use your own data.